In 1873, the United States government passed the Comstock Act, which made it a federal crime to send information about self-sufficient living practices, including certain herbal remedies and home medical treatments, through the Postal Service. People were arrested not for doing anything harmful, but for sharing knowledge that families had passed down for generations. That is not a small thing. What got buried under that law, and under decades of corporate convenience culture that followed, was an entire way of living. A way that required almost no money, no permits, no subscriptions, and no dependence on systems that could fail you overnight. That is what this video is about. 17 skills your great-grandparents used every single day that have been quietly forgotten, regulated away, or simply never taught again. If you want more videos like this one, subscribe before we get into the list. These are the ones that tend to disappear from channels without warning. Number 17. Ash lye soap making. Before the Civil War, almost every farmstead in America made its own soap. The process used two things that cost nothing: wood ash and animal fat. You saved ash from your fireplace all winter in a wooden barrel called a leach barrel, packed it tight and poured water through it slowly. What dripped out the bottom was lye, potassium hydroxide, a powerful alkaline liquid. You combined that with rendered fat from pigs, deer, or cattle, cooked it over low heat for hours, and you had soap. Soft soap, they called it. A family of 6 could make a year's worth in a single spring afternoon. The practice didn't disappear because people stopped wanting clean clothes. Procter & Gamble, founded in 1837 in Cincinnati, spent decades lobbying for standardized commercial soap regulations and building distribution networks that made homemade soap feel primitive by comparison. By the 1920s, it was easier to buy a bar than make one. Easier is not always better. Today, ash lye soap making is completely legal everywhere in the United States. The only thing stopping you is that nobody ever showed you how. Number 16. Green roof construction. Sod roofing was standard across the upper Midwest and Great Plains from the 1860s through the 1890s. Settlers cut blocks of prairie sod, grass side down, and layered them 2 to 3 courses thick over wooden roof boards. The roots locked together, the grass insulated. A well-built sod roof kept a house warmer in winter and cooler in summer than most modern fiberglass insulation does. Some lasted 20 years without major repair. Sod roofing didn't die because it failed. It died because lumber became cheap after the railroad expansion of the 1870s, and because building codes written in the early 20th century were designed around commercial materials sold by companies, not cut from your own land. Today, green roofs are technically allowed in many jurisdictions but require engineering permits that cost more than the roof itself. Something that your great-grandmother built with her own hands now requires a licensed contractor. Number 15. Food cellaring without refrigeration. Before electric refrigeration became widespread in American homes, which didn't really happen until the 1930s and 40s, every family with land kept a root cellar, not just a hole in the ground. A carefully designed structure, usually dug into a north-facing hillside, built to maintain a temperature between 32 and 40 degrees Fahrenheit year-round using nothing but the earth itself. Carrots were packed in damp sand. Apples were stored in barrels with straw between each layer. Cabbages were hung upside down from the ceiling beams. A properly stocked root cellar fed a family of 8 through a full winter with zero electricity and zero cost. The knowledge of how to build one, where to site it, how deep to dig, how to vent it, has almost entirely left mainstream culture. No corporation killed this one. No law banned it. People just stopped building them when refrigerators arrived, and then 2 generations passed without anyone teaching the skill. That silence is its own kind of loss. Number 14. Seed saving and open pollinated varieties. From the colonial era through the early 20th century, every farmer saved seed. You harvested your best plants, let the strongest specimens go to seed, dried them, stored them through winter, and planted them again in spring. Over generations, families developed varieties perfectly adapted to their specific soil and climate. There were over 7,000 named varieties of apple growing in America by 1805, thousands of bean varieties, hundreds of squash. The Plant Patent Act of 1930, and later the Plant Variety Protection Act of 1970, created legal frameworks that allowed corporations to own seeds. Monsanto's aggressive legal campaigns against farmers who saved patented seed, documented in court cases from the 1990s onward, changed the culture of farming entirely. Today, saving open-pollinated, non-patented seed is completely legal and one of the most quietly revolutionary things you can do with a garden. It costs nothing. It gives back more every year. There is a pattern worth noticing here. Most of what made families genuinely self-sufficient required no money, no permission, and no infrastructure. That is exactly why it was either bought out, regulated, or quietly made to feel outdated. A person who can feed, clothe, and shelter themselves without purchasing anything is not a very good consumer. And the entire structure of the modern economy depends on you being a very good consumer. Number 13. Tallow candle making. Before kerosene lamps and long before electric lights, candles were made at home from tallow, rendered beef or mutton fat, or from bayberry wax collected from wild shrubs along the Atlantic coast. Tallow candles were dipped, not poured. You melted the fat in a deep pot, hung wicks from a wooden rod, and dipped them dozens of times over the course of an afternoon, letting each layer cool before the next. A skilled woman, and it was almost always women who held this skill, could make several dozen candles in a single day. Bayberry candles were reserved for special occasions. The wax had to be boiled off the berries and skimmed. It took about 15 pounds of berries to make 1 pound of wax. That is real work. The fact that people did it tells you how much a reliable light source meant in a world with no alternatives. Number 12. Natural log preservation with pine tar. Wooden structures in the 1800s didn't rot the way people assume they did. Not because the wood was better, but because people treated it. Pine tar, boiled from the heartwood of pine stumps, was painted onto fence posts, barn siding, and roof shingles. It sealed the wood against moisture and insects without any synthetic chemistry. Swedish pine tar, documented in use across Scandinavia since the Viking Age, was common on American farms through the early 20th century. The practice faded as synthetic preservatives like creosote and later petroleum-based wood sealers took over the market in the 1910s and 20s. Pine tar is still legal to purchase and use. It still works exactly as well as it always did. Number 11. Hand-dug well construction. Before municipal water systems, families dug their own wells by hand. A skilled well digger could sink a well through loose soil at a rate of about 3 feet per day. They built wooden curbing inside the shaft as they went down to prevent cave-in. They read the land, looking for low spots, willow trees, seasonal seeps to estimate water depth before they broke a single shovelful of ground. Modern well drilling requires licensed contractors in all 50 states, and for good reason. Improperly cased wells can contaminate groundwater. But the knowledge of how to read a landscape for water, how to test soil layers, how to estimate depth, that knowledge has no regulation. It is just gone. Number 10. Animal fat rendering and storage. When a hog was slaughtered in the 1800s, nothing was wasted. The fat, called leaf lard from around the kidneys, and back fat from beneath the skin, was rendered slowly in a cast iron pot, strained through cheesecloth, and poured into crocks. That lard was used for cooking, for waterproofing leather boots, for lubricating wagon axles, for making soap, for treating dry skin in winter. One hog provided enough fat to serve a dozen different purposes for a full year. The vegetable oil industry, heavily pushed by companies like Crisco, introduced by Procter & Gamble in 1911, spent decades publishing research suggesting animal fats were dangerous. That research has since been seriously challenged, but the cultural shift it caused was permanent. Most people today have never rendered lard and have no idea how useful it is. Number 9. Herbal wound care and poultice making. Before antiseptics and antibiotics, cuts, burns, and infections were treated with plant-based poultices. Plantain leaves, the common weed found in almost every lawn, were chewed or bruised and pressed against wounds to draw out infection. Comfrey root, known as knitbone since at least the medieval period, was applied to sprains and bruises. Pine resin was used as a wound sealant and antiseptic across dozens of indigenous and settler traditions. The FDA's broad authority over health claims, solidified through legislation in 1938 and expanded in 1994, makes it illegal for anyone to tell you that a plant can treat a specific condition, even when centuries of documented use support the claim. The plants still work. You just aren't supposed to be told that. Number 8. Fireplace backdrafting and heat management. This one sounds simple, but the engineering knowledge behind it was real and deliberate. A Rumford fireplace, designed by Benjamin Thompson in the 1790s, used a shallow, angled firebox and a specific throat dimension to radiate heat forward into the room rather than letting it escape up the chimney. It also reduced smoking dramatically. Rumford published his findings, and the design spread across New England within a decade. Modern building codes in most states require EPA-certified wood-burning inserts or stoves, and effectively prohibit new open-hearth fireplaces in many jurisdictions. not for safety but largely due to emissions regulations written with significant input from the natural gas industry. Number 7. Bark tanning of leather. Oak bark tanning was the standard method of producing leather in America from the colonial era through the late 19th century. Hides were soaked in pits filled with water and ground oak bark for anywhere from 3 months to 2 years, depending on the thickness. The tannins from the bark bonded chemically with the collagen in the hide, producing leather that lasted decades. Vegetable tanned leather from this method can still be found in antique shops, still supple after 150 years. The chemical tanning industry, using chromium salts developed in the 1860s, was faster and cheaper. By 1910, chrome tanning dominated American production. Traditional bark tanning died commercially, but the knowledge and the method still work, exactly as they always did. Number 6. Rain barrel water harvesting. Collecting rainwater from rooftops was standard practice across rural America for centuries. Before 1880, almost every farmhouse had at least one cistern, a large underground tank, sometimes holding several thousand gallons, fed by gutters from the roof. Soft rainwater was prized for washing hair, doing laundry, and watering kitchen gardens because it contained no minerals. As of the early 2010s, collecting rainwater was restricted or outright illegal in several western states, including Colorado, where it remained illegal until 2016, even for homeowners on their own property. The rationale was water rights law, but the effect was that a person could not collect the rain that fell on their own roof. Colorado now allows up to 110 gallons per household, the right to catch rain. That is where we are. Here is another thing worth sitting with. Every skill on this list was developed by ordinary people without formal education, government assistance, or corporate products. They worked because they were practical, tested over generations, and passed between neighbors. The idea that modern people need expert permission to do things their great-grandparents did without a second thought, that idea deserves a great deal more scrutiny than it gets. Number 5. Pit-smoked meat preservation. Long before propane grills and electric smokers, meat was preserved through smoke. A pit smoker was exactly that, a pit dug in the ground, lined with stones or clay, with green hardwood burned low and slow beneath a rack of meat. Hickory, apple, and mesquite each imparted different flavors and different antimicrobial compounds. Properly smoked and dried meat, jerky kept for months without refrigeration. The technique predates European settlement by thousands of years and was common across Native American, Caribbean, and later Southern American foodways. It costs nothing if you have land and firewood. Number 4. Butter churning and cream separation. Before commercial dairy, every family with a cow separated their own cream and churned their own butter. Cream rises naturally when fresh milk is left to stand for 12 to 24 hours in a cool room. That cream, churned in a wooden dash churned for 20 to 40 minutes, produces butter and buttermilk simultaneously. The buttermilk was used for baking. Nothing was discarded. Raw milk sales are now illegal for human consumption in about 20 states and restricted in most others, primarily due to lobbying by commercial dairy interests beginning in the 1950s. If you have access to a legal source of raw or pasteurized cream, churning butter at home is completely legal everywhere and takes less than half an hour. Number 3. Willow bark pain relief. Willow bark has been used as a fever reducer and pain reliever since at least 400 BC, documented in the writings of Hippocrates. American settlers used it routinely. Strips of white willow bark boiled into a strong tea. The active compound salicin is chemically related to aspirin. Bayer patented acetylsalicylic acid in 1899 and built a pharmaceutical empire around a slightly modified version of what grew freely along every riverbank in America. You cannot be told by any herb seller that willow bark tea relieves a headache, because that constitutes an unapproved medical claim under FDA regulations. But your great-great-grandmother knew, and her grandmother knew, and the knowledge is still there if you want it. Number 2. Home grain milling. Families who grew wheat, corn, or rye milled their own grain well into the early 20th century. Small stone hand mills and later small cast iron mills were common household equipment. You could mill enough flour for a week of baking in under an hour. Freshly milled whole grain flour contains the bran, germ, and endosperm together, all the nutrition the original grain carried. Commercial white flour strips the germ out entirely to extend shelf life, a practice standardized across American milling by the 1920s. Home grain mills are still legal to own and use. A decent hand mill costs between $80 and $200 and lasts a lifetime. That is the one-time price of never buying flour again. And number 1. Reading weather without instruments. Before barometers and weather apps, farmers read the sky, the wind, the behavior of animals, and the feel of the air. A ring around the moon meant moisture in high clouds, rain within 24 to 48 hours. Swallows flying low meant insects were close to the ground, which meant pressure was dropping. Cattle lying down in the afternoon without shade meant a storm was coming. These were not superstitions. Many of them hold up under modern meteorological analysis. They were observations accumulated over centuries of daily necessity. No corporation killed this skill. No law banned it. People simply stopped looking up. Every single skill on this list was built on the same foundation. Pay attention, waste nothing, depend on yourself first. That is not nostalgia, that is a philosophy. And it is more relevant now with supply chains that collapse, with grocery store shelves that empty in a day, with utility grids that fail in a storm, than it has been at any point since the generation that actually lived these skills was still alive. Pick one thing from this list, just one. Try it this week, churn some cream, save a seed, render some fat, take a walk and read the clouds. Then come down to the comments and tell me which one you chose and what happened. That is how this knowledge stays alive.